Back in late February, the Seoul High Court delivered a landmark ruling asserting that Korea's National Health Insurance Service should provide spousal coverage to a same-sex couple. So what is the story behind this legal recognition of rights for same-sex couples? What has been the response to this landmark ruling? And what lies ahead in efforts to ensure the rights of the LGBTQ community here and elsewhere? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we touch upon efforts to ensure the basic rights of the LGBTQ community here in the country and elsewhere around the world. For more on this, I have Professor Michael Rosenfeld at Stanford University live on the line over in the US. Professor Rosenfeld, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I also have Kwon Soa with me here in the studio. So welcome back.
Great to be here.
Right, so let's begin then with a few words, of course, about the landmark ruling by the court, the Seoul High Court here in the capital city, that called for same health benefits for same-sex couples.
Right. Love has won, not discrimination or hate, is how So Sung-wook and Kim Yong-min described the unprecedented ruling that granted the couple spousal coverage under the nation's health insurance program. Now, for global viewers, the names may not give them a hint on the gender of the two people that I just mentioned. They are both men. So let me walk you through to where it all began. So and Kim tied the knot in 2019. But let me point out here that tying the knot can mean either to get married or to perform a marriage ceremony. The latter is what the gay couple did as they held a wedding ceremony 4 years ago. They lived together since 2013. Now, in a conventional relationship, the two would be seen as being in a de facto marriage, but not by the National Health Insurance Service, which denied So insurance premium as a dependent of his partner Kim. Following their wedding ceremony in 2019, in February 2020, the state insurer did grant So coverage under Kim's health insurance program as an employed person. However, in October in the same year, the health agency revoked the registration by saying they made a mistake as they were not aware they gave rights to a same-sex couple. So the next year, in February 2021, So Sung-wook sued the National Health Insurance Service. Almost a year after filing the administrative lawsuit, January last year, a lower court ruled in favor of the NHIS, saying the state of being married in Korea is still considered a union between a man and a woman according to civil law. And So appealed. And last month, the Seoul High Court overturned the lower court's ruling, and this decision was based on the country's law that says sexual orientation must not be grounds for discrimination, and that when it comes to discrimination in recruitment, education, and commercial services and public services.
Right. And Professor Rosenfeld, broadly speaking now, what can you tell us perhaps about access to healthcare by the LGBTQ community there in the US?
Great question. So the first thing I want to say about that is that the Korean and the US healthcare systems are really different. Korea has a universal national healthcare. In the United States, there's a patchwork system of government healthcare and employer-sponsored private healthcare, which means that in the United States, there are 30 million people, which is about 9% of the population, who don't have any kind of healthcare at all. And that's problematic, and that's one reason why Korea has better life expectancy and lower infant mortality rate than the United States. And since so much of American healthcare is organized through work and employment, it was crucial for same-sex couples to be able to marry their partners in the United States in order to get healthcare insurance through the spouse's job. So in the United States, we've had marriage equality since 2015. That is the right of same-sex couples to marry. And that's greatly improved LGBTQ people's access to healthcare. Because now if you're married, you and your spouse can both get health insurance through either one employment.
Right, I see.
Meanwhile, back on the local front, so what has been the response to this court ruling, and what are now some of the legal protocols that lie ahead?
Well, Amnesty International released a statement welcoming the ruling, calling it significant in that it is the first decision made by a court at any level here in South Korea that legally recognizes same-sex couples. The NGO's East Asia researcher Boram Chang mentioned, though, Korea still has a long way to end discrimination. This latest move offers hope, though, that prejudice can be overcome. The researcher also says that this brings South Korea closer to achieving marriage equality. Activists who have long highlighted the need for legislation against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation praised the ruling too. Kagunet, a Korean advocacy group which the law firm representing Seoul is included in, congratulated the couple and welcomed the first ruling in which the judiciary, quote, recognized the equal rights of same-sex couples. But with opinions regarding sexual minorities remaining divided, the response to the court decision was very much mixed. Religious groups and conservative civic organizations are in protest against the move, as they have been campaigning for decades against LGBTQ rights. One group that voiced its strong opposition towards the ruling said in a statement that giving the right as a dependent for same-sex couples is as if the law regards same-sex partners as legal spouses, calling it a shocking ruling. Interestingly, those in favor of same-sex marriage actually say this one landmark ruling is a big leap forward, but it's also just one out of roughly 1,000 rights that heterosexual married couples enjoy. So basically the opposite from the opposition, which says this one law seems as if same-sex partners are being seen as legal spouses. Now, the NHIS, so the National Health Insurance Service, is planning to appeal the ruling now to the Supreme Court. But for now, the landmark ruling has given immense hope to the So Kim couple and other sexual minorities, as it is Korea's first legal recognition of social benefits for gay couples. But again, just to clarify, this does not mean that same-sex couples' marriage is recognized as a legal status in Korea.
Right, of course it's not. Not like in the US, where it was recognized in the year 2015, as Professor Rosenfeld pointed out. Professor, do you believe this latest court ruling here in South Korea will perhaps serve to take the country a baby step closer, perhaps, to ensuring greater protection of basic rights for its LGBTQ community?
I think so, absolutely. Treating people equally has a lot of benefits. First of all, people love who they love, and the less government gets in the way of consensual relationships between adults, the more happy families we'll have. Discrimination ends up hurting everybody. In the United States, before the government was recognizing same-sex couples, some forward-thinking companies in the 1990s were allowing workers to identify same-sex partners as dependents for the purposes of health insurance. Apple and Disney were the pioneers, but a lot of other companies followed, because showing respect for your workers and your citizens is smart. It's good business. Companies were more successful when they had happier workers, and soon other companies followed. 20 years later, gay rights had majority support in public opinion in the United States, and the government started recognizing same-sex marriages.
Right. Staying with this topic of discrimination that Professor Rosenfeld has also touched upon, so there's an anti-discrimination bill at the Parliament that is being strongly debated, and the bill seeks to protect Korea's LGBTQ community. Tell us a bit about that bill.
Well, Sunny, broadly speaking, it looks like Koreans believe giving sexual minorities the same benefits as heterosexual married couples is one thing, and to not discriminate minority groups is another. So let me explain this. Nearly 6 in 10 South Koreans oppose the idea of same-sex marriage. That's according to a 2022 research by Hankuk Research, a survey. But roughly 6 in 10 Koreans support the passage of an anti-discrimination law that includes a stipulation of punitive measures for discriminatory acts based on 26 categories, including sexual orientation and sexual identity. And the National Human Rights Commission of Korea, which cited a Real Meters study, said that 67% of South Koreans supported the passage of the anti-discrimination law. And another Gallup survey said 57%. There's quite a gap between those two surveys, but both of them were conducted in 2022. There might be some differences in how they formulated the questions in those surveys. The general acceptance of LGBTQ in Korea's society might be growing, but it's also the part that calls for the protection of these groups that's obstructing the passage of that bill, which is currently sitting in a subcommittee of the National Assembly. Conservatives are mainly blocking the bill, but opposition exists on both sides in the political arena. A large part of this is attributed to religious groups, especially Christians, as from their perspective and belief, matrimony can only be allowed between a man and a woman. Anti-discrimination measures have been called on for decades. Former President Kim Dae-jung, 25 years ago, was the first South Korean president to support an anti-discrimination bill, followed by former President Roh Moo-hyun, who did so too. And since 2007, various versions of the bill were introduced, but so far they failed in gaining a majority in votes. Opponents show of demonstration of protests come in different forms. For instance, they persuade schools to remove books from libraries that include characters of sexual minorities, and they claim that the bill threatens traditions and challenges the integrity of what they perceive as family. They also say that it's a threat to children as well. And also what I found interesting is that while the population of Christians in the country is said to be on the decrease, there are some people that are opposed to same-sex marriage and rights for same-sex couples, and they're not religious. So regardless of their religion, these groups join Christian groups so that they're on the same page regarding this anti-discrimination bill. So that's also another interesting perspective I found.
Right, and for the sake of comparison, Professor Rosenfeld, what can you tell us about the legal framework available in the US to crack down on discrimination against the LGBTQ community?
It's a super important question. So it was only in 2020 that the US Supreme Court made workplace discrimination against LGBTQ people illegal. Before 2020, discrimination against gay people was legal in about half of the US states. And the other thing to remember is that making discrimination illegal does not make discrimination go away. In the US, if you're the victim of discrimination, you as the victim have to do a lot of the work to prove you've been discriminated against. So discrimination can be hard to prove. And we still have a lot of anti-LGBTQ discrimination in the US, but now the victims at least have a better chance of taking the perpetrators to court and winning. One other thing to note is that the US military, the largest military in the world, used to discriminate against gay soldiers, which forced gay soldiers to hide their identities and made the army less effective. Gay soldiers who were great at their jobs were forced out of the military. Now, since 2014, we have a military where everyone serves openly and all talented people are welcome, and we're stronger because of it.
Right, that is good to know. It's an issue that Korea itself is currently debating, of course. And beyond Korea, so what is the legal status of, what is the status that is of legal protection of sexual minorities elsewhere in Asia?
Well, in general, sexual minorities find more protection in Western countries. That's also why some same-sex couples in Korea actually go abroad to get married. But some Asian countries do have measures that protect their rights. Now, Taiwan legalized same-sex marriage in 2019, being Asia's frontrunner in regards to same-sex marriage. It had also given other rights back in 2015, and Thailand, which already has a law prohibiting discrimination against same-sex sexual minorities for 15 years, is likely to follow Taiwan also in terms of allowing marriage among gay and lesbian couples too. Japan, neighboring Japan, has similar divided opinions like here in Korea. Korea, especially in the political arena. But a recent poll showed that around 70% of its citizens are in favor of recognizing same-sex couples or marriages. A recent ruling by a Japanese court recognized the lack of legal protections for same-sex families, which constituted a breach of their rights, while upholding the prohibition on same-sex partnerships.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Rosenfeld, advocates of the LGBTQ community here in the country say Korea's laws fail to reflect the public sentiment of the times. This, of course, going back to what my colleague Soa mentioned about how well over 50% of the people here are in support of rights for the LGBTQ community. That being said, what do you care to suggest is one way, perhaps, of bridging this gap?
So a case like So and Kim's can move public opinion, because people will see that it's only fair to treat them like a married couple. That's really what they are. The more gay people in Korea come out of the closet, the more public opinion will liberalize. When you find out that your friend, your neighbor, or your child is gay, that changes you. Young people around the world are much more accepting of LGBTQ identities. They have gay friends. So as today's young people grow into positions of authority, I think we can expect a liberalization of laws and customs towards gay people in Korea, but change takes time and it won't happen overnight.
Right. And so going back to what you mentioned earlier during our discussion, same-sex marriage here in Korea is not legally recognized. It is recognized in the US since the year 2015. Here in Korea, we have yet to recognize it. That being said, which are some of the countries perhaps that began recognizing same-sex marriage?
So for that, let me refer to the Pew Research Center and also other data I've found, according to which some 30 countries and territories have enacted laws that permit gays and lesbians to marry. It says a growing number of governments consider granting such rights, but most are in Europe and the Americas. Now, the Netherlands was the first country in the world that allowed same-sex marriage, and as of February 2023, 19 countries in Europe legally recognize and perform same-sex marriage. Now, Denmark, meanwhile, led the way in allowing same-sex couples equal rights to their heterosexual counterparts. Although it was the 11th one to pass a bill that legalizes gay marriage in 2012, in 1989, Denmark became the first country in the world to permit same-sex couples to register as partners. In 2010, the country gave gay and lesbian couples the right to adopt children. With this legalization process, even the state church is required to allow same-sex partners to marry in churches if they want to. And now some data on the U.S., although we did hear from Professor before. In Massachusetts in 2004, Massachusetts was the pioneer in same-sex marriage, and then 11 years later, 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal throughout the country. And this happened through numerous court rulings, state legislation, and direct popular votes as well. So now, according to the law, the amendment's provision of equal protection is violated if marriage is restricted to only heterosexual couples. Meanwhile, in Latin America, there are also a number of countries who allow same-sex marriage, who legalized it. In 2010, Argentina was the first country who permitted this. Other countries are Brazil, Colombia, and quite recently, in March 2022, Chile followed suit. South Africa in 2006 legalized same-sex marriage, but ever since then, it's still the only African country who has permitted this. And then last but not least, again, in Asia, it's only Taiwan who has allowed same-sex marriage.
Right, and staying with same-sex marriage, Professor Rosenfeld, do you share with us the US's journey, if I may, to legally acknowledge same-sex unions?
For sure. I think the main factor that created change in the US was gay and lesbian people coming out of the closet. That is to say, letting their friends and family and coworkers know that they were gay. This started happening a lot in the 1990s, And over time, most Americans knew they had some gay people in their lives, and that's what really changed public opinion. But before gay people felt safe coming out of the closet, there had to be changes in the law that made it less dangerous to be gay, that made it safe to come out. In a lot of US states, it was illegal to have sex with someone of the same sex. Those laws went back to the 17th century. And those laws were not overturned until 2003. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton was the first US president to ever say anything positive about gay rights, and he actually campaigned on a platform of letting gay people serve openly in the military. He didn't achieve that end, but it was a real symbolic moment because a leader's words can make a difference. And when we see brave gay rights pioneers fight for instance, the right to marry, their example helps change minds. And I actually think that Kim and So may be able to have an effect like that.
Right, hopefully, of course. And so, while countries like the US recognize same-sex marriage, there are other countries where this issue remains very, very controversial, right?
Right, so let's go back to neighboring Japan. As I briefly mentioned before, there's also a strong political divide there as the ruling party insists banning same-sex marriage is not a discrimination. And this is also a comment that recently Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has made. But efforts on the other side continue as earlier this week on Monday, the country's leading opposition party submitted a bill to Parliament for the legalization of same-sex unions. And also fierce debate is going on in Panama, where the Supreme Court on March 1st released a statement. Actually, the statement was released on March 1st, but the ruling was in mid-February. And this statement said that same-sex marriage cannot be categorized as a fundamental, and also it said as a human right. So that was quite a strong wording, is what pundits say in regards to banning same-sex marriage in Panama.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Rosenfeld, do you suppose perhaps that education at an earlier stage, perhaps elementary school or even younger, where you teach them perhaps about the importance of having family structures that are quite different from the conventional ones, will perhaps serve to later allow for more tolerance, so to speak, for same-sex unions, marriages, rights to better ensure protection for them? What are your thoughts on this?
I'm not sure that that education, that sort of the curriculum of elementary school has that big of an effect. The thing that really touches people is knowing someone in their own life. And what's key then is if the uncle or the aunt or the cousin who is gay is out and open about it, then young people grow up knowing somebody who's gay, who's not only normal and positive, but a sort of loving part of the family. And it's that personal connection that really gives people the understanding that gay, lesbian, transgender, queer people are just like themselves. And so the process has to start with the LGBTQ people feeling safe enough to come out of the closet so that the people in their social circles get to know them and understand who they really are.
Right, I see. All right, Professor Rosenfeld, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today over in the US, of course, and so in the studio. Thank you so much for your insights.
Always my pleasure.
Right, well, on that note, we end this week's editions of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching.